Hey there, this is your orchestration tutor Thomas Goss, presenting the fourth of our 7 minim participant entries to the 2020 Orchestration Challenge. This one by David. So, really enjoyable score, very romantic, some beautiful colors in here. Some of this really kind of comes down to preference, like what is the sound that you prefer to hear, some things that I might have a different take on, like for instance, really aggressively stacked octaves right in here against horns and strings that might not compensate enough. Do you know what I mean? Giving it more of an organ-like sound. But we'll go through this and talk about the efficacy of different possible things, ways of strengthening, and so on. Okay, so starting off here with Piccolo in its lowest register, having a very sort of a folk kind of a sound. I really love low piccolo when it's done well, and this is a really great example. Now, doubling it with harp. Okay, so one of my... I'm not so sure that this is quite enough beneath the piccolo. Do you know what I mean? I would almost wonder whether or not you could incorporate the melody note into the harp, right? Just to give it just a slightly bigger sense of fullness. Do you know what I mean? It just really feels kind of barren right now, almost to the point at which I would almost wonder how it would sound if, like, extremely soft tremolo strings were behind the harp, just really way, marked down to pianissimo or even softer, just to kind of give more of a sense of continuity in there. But all the same, I see what you're getting at there. It's a very, if we're going into the folk idiom here with piccolo in its lowest register and so on, evoking that feeling, then why not evoke also a very simple feeling here? So as far as that's concerned, it really, really works. Now here, we are going forwards with the piccolo doubling the first flute. Very softly. That's actually a very wonderful effect. And then, of course, pushing into here as the piccolo gets a little stronger. And, of course, so does the flute gets into its area of best control and sound. Just so long as it doesn't get too loud right in here, then there's a beautiful balance and control of timbre. And, of course, bringing in the clarinets is fine. I noticed that you do not have the clarinets crescendo. And that's fine. I mean, you can. It just depends on where you want the strength to be. If you just want it to be in the upper winds, that's great. However, please consider that by not having any crescendo here, that this actually becomes weak. The sense of suspension as the pitches rise, right? Like the sense of this G continuing on. I would actually start the bassoon right here. Doubling this sounding G, and then bringing it forward, and then so the way that this harmony kind of grounds things from below is a little bit lost with the lack of any kind of dynamic nuance here, right? That's just my take on it. This is great right in here. I love the way that you balanced your harp. That's totally fine. One thing I'm going to mention before I forget, this is one of those things that sort of kind of poking at the back of my mind, and then when I get to the point, I forget it. And that is right here. I feel that the roll should have started a little earlier, like during this, because like when you finally get to the roll and you have this little, roll, the two different kinds of rolls here. When you get to the harp roll, the timpani roll, tremolo, seems to sort of be a little bit of an afterthought, where I feel it could actually really bring the energy together by starting a little earlier and then maybe actually stopping on, at the end of this harp, right? Okay, it's just an aesthetic thing. But this is all scored fine, and it will be very audible against the strings and winds and horns. But one thing I do have to say to you, like, don't think of the different hands of the harp as being different regions of different regions of dynamics in the way that you score this out, right? It is better for you just to have a mezzo forte marking right here and one single diminuendo mark going to piano. And if you're worried about that not showing up, like the dynamics not working in Sibelius, then just select the dynamic and then type option 5 or alt 5, and then this dynamic will affect all of the other, both of the staves, right? So you don't have to worry about having to mark each staff separately, right? So, and then this is already sort of multi-regional, and then this one you would want to also mark option 5 or alt 5 and just erase this one, right? See, now that is a way better for the harpist. All right, so now let's go back to just some general thoughts about this. In one of yesterday's releases, I talked a great deal about like the difference between piano scoring and string bowing. Now here you've chosen to pretty much stick to the piano phrasing, right? So the problem here is it kind of doesn't make sense on repeated notes, right? So like this just becomes an expressive thing. Now, yes, you can slur over repeated notes in some wind scoring, but I just feel that that's very imprecise. Do you know what I mean? And I think it's better, like if you really want that sound, it's better to mark, legato and then just and then have these clearly tongued, because it takes away the emphasis. You know what I mean? Like getting too legato with this, you just don't hear the da 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 da. You just start to lose that sense of pulse, right? And of energy. So I would say just redo this, right? Just really rethink the way that you're slurring some of these notes. This is all fine, of course, but like then slurring into the middle of the measure, then we don't feel the middle of the measure. Da 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 or da. There's a da da. Do you know what I mean? I feel like we're missing the. It's just too smooth, possibly. And then when the music starts to climb and get more intense, and you keep up that strategy of slurring, then it starts to make less and less sense to me. And just think about also slurring across the downbeat, right? Like we end up not having a strong feeling of pulse, and of course this is very long. I mean it's soft, so it's very easy for the average horn player to play this long. But then again, just like string bowing, there's a kind of a certain lack of control, lack of kind of any kind of push on the downbeat and so on and so forth. So maybe just rethink this. This is one of the things in the 12 common scoring errors video, right? So did you watch that, right? So just think about not just dropping. I mean, and you don't. I mean, you do make a few changes here and there in the slurring, but yeah, I just feel that you don't have to. It doesn't all have to be really smooth and then to the point where the repeated notes start appearing under slurs and so on. All right, so in terms of balance, there's some strange things going on here. Okay, you start off with pianissimo, and then you have your horns coming in at piano, and you are keeping your bassoons and your bassoon and your English horn at pianissimo, right? So, and then here you have piano horns. So the piano horns are even with everybody being nice and soft, the piano horns are going to have a presence in the sound picture that is pungent, right? So even with them really holding back, they are going to dominate what's going on in here. So if you want to avoid that, you can do what I did, which is just to mark them down, right? So everybody like bring up your bassoons to, maybe this is just an oversight, right? So everybody in the winds piano, and then you mark down the horns to pianissimo, and then you get the proper kind of balance, or just like where um, the timbral intensity of all the instruments is equal, right? And it's not that. I mean, you don't have to do this. Like the players will adjust, but it's just like, I mean, the realistic thing would be that in rehearsal, if this became an issue, the conductor would eyeball the horns and say, "Could you just mark pianissimo there, please, through to bar 6 or whatever, or bar 7." So if that's going to happen anyways, possibly, then you might as well just write it in, right? That's my philosophy on it. And now here we have like crescendo and diminuendo. So I feel that this, like, you cannot. It's almost an arbitrary kind of a thing. Okay. An arbitrary is a fighting word for an orchestrator, right? How dare you call this arbitrary? But it's not you. It's the marking, right? So what are you crescendoing to, right? So here we have horns, piano, crescendo, and then diminuendo here. And here we have strings, piano. So by the time the horns get to right around here, how loud are they? Are they mezzo forte, mezzo piano? Are they forte, right? And if the louder the horns are intended to crescendo to, the more I question that this should be marked piano. And then right in here, you've got these big, beautiful, gorgeous, slurred statements here, and then there's like the strings are just basically playing, bowing every single note, right? So I think maybe rethinking this might be in order. And then, of course, like, you have the slur across here. So do you really intend this to be slur B, 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 right? So in which case, like, it might be better to have these B's to be like a sort of portato, right? So a slurred tenuto or even a slurred staccato, like just having it pulse, right? So that I mean, at this point, like if the player was really going to do exactly what you said here and just really slur or almost tie all these together, it would be better for this B just to be one long note, right? One big football with a dot next to it, with a beauty mark. All right, and then once again, slurring into the downbeat, right? So it just sort of, I feel like, if the horns are going to start here, right? If they're going to tongue this note, and then the strings are going to play on this, then I think the wind shouldn't just go, yeah, I mean, I think they should go da da, tongue on the downbeat. Maybe they could slow down. Ta ta ta, or ta ta ta. So maybe rethink some of the slurring just overall, right? Just like, I mean, I normally wouldn't go into such huge lengths about this, but I just, I really want you to, like, obviously you were thinking of the most delicate kind of scoring right in here. So that is really, what's worth thinking about. Now, like, in terms of the actual positions of the instruments and, the choices and the texture and everything else, I think it all works really, really great, with the caveat of, stacking so many octaves in the winds and just having like a little bit of string and horn kind of accompaniment below. So whatever happens here should happen here in terms of the slurring and the, I think that, like, if you really are going to join these functions together, then I think that they should really kind of reflect the same motion and have like the same kind of beautiful smoothness to them, right? So I think you need more slurs in the strings. They need to match what's going on the horns, and just decide whether or not you want this B up here to be a just a dotted whole note, or whether you want this to have a pulse to it, sort of like maybe a portato, like slurred tenuto, and so on. So like just a few things to sort of rethink in there possibly. And that takes us to this page. All right, so it's a little vertically crowded, right? And we've got this whole question of divisi versus unison, two, and then and so on. So like, how to score this in a way that kind of makes more sense for the copyist, right? So what you've done here is A2, and then this, and then A2, and then sim for simile, and then the same thing here, or simile. Here we got pizzicato, divisi, unison, and so on. So I mean that works. I mean that's a it's not the most elegant way of scoring it. There are some other ways, like with more vertical room, you might have just had two separate voices scored here, and then when they go into intervals, and then it's just like the easiest thing to understand. Or you could also question: do you really need two clarinets? Do you need that much force? It's kind of cool. Like you have like three separate kinds of articulation here, so that could be problematic, or it could be a cool thing, right? So you've got the drier, plucked, kind of slightly chesty sound of the violas. You've got the lusher, kind of gooey sort of, or dewy, maybe that's a better word, sound of the harp. And then here you've got the legato clarinets, right? So, I mean, what would have unified this more would be like secco harp and staccato clarinets, right? And then you would get a really unified sound with the pizzicato, right? The pizzicato is the thing, since it's not a cello with a sort of a rounder, more sustained pizzicato, you're really like anything that unifies these three elements has got to, it's the violas that dictate it, right? Because they're the only ones that can't change unless you change them to bowing. So one thing that I'm kind of running into a lot, and like seeing harp being used to interpret the left-hand patterns, is the feeling of pacing, maybe the feeling of over-pacing. Do you know what I mean? I mean, how would this sound with the harp cut out? Right? It's like, what would that sound like? By the way, that I would say I would just put one big slur mark over each bar of the harp, like ending on the downbeat here, and then the same thing there. The harpist doesn't have an option of making this slur feel like it's come to a completion and then started again. It's not like a slight lift and letting go of the pedal or whatever with the piano. The harpist basically has strings that will just continue to sustain, right? Unless you specifically ask them to stop, and that's just way too fiddly, right? And that's not what you intend anyways, correct? So just put one big long slur mark over each of these, and just bring them all together. Okay, now the question is, like, how audible is the harp in a practical way? So, here you got it marked mezzo forte. I would say forte, and once again, you don't need the dynamic in both hands. Just right here in the middle, and for the Sibelius playback, mark it option 5. Okay. So my instinct here is thinking about the gentle scoring around it. The harp will have, it will be audible to an extent. However, the pizzicato of the violas is going to start to take over its sound, and then the same thing, like in terms of the clarinets and so on. So I think that the slurring here is fine. I think you left out a slur mark here and here in the bass clarinet. So I think that the players are going to sneak a breath right here, right? So you could actually even write one in for them, and then like just to show them it's okay. You're not gonna, it doesn't bother you if they take a breath right there. Okay, so in terms of pacing, here's where I feel that maybe the timpani might be a little too much, right? So like it's already enough that the harp is really kind of going ba 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 ba, just like really regularly throughout, right? And that having things that are plucked, right, increases the sense of punctuation of of the divisions of the beat, of the subdivision of the bar. So is adding timpani too much for that, right? Would it be something that would be better to hold off until here? And then when we get to right in here, and the texture gets very thick, and especially you've got forte bassoons, the harp will just disappear. So with this very complex texture right in here, the celesta does not have a chance. It is wasted here, and indeed in the mock-up you barely can hear anything happening there, right? You'd have to be pointed out, hey, there's celesta here, right? And and the further thing too is that in this kind of a texture, you put the celesta at its greatest disadvantage, right? So the middle, this sort of middle range right in here, notes between C below middle C and C above middle C, in this kind of landscape are just really, they're not, they cannot compete at all. At best, like if this line were, say, maybe an octave higher, I don't think you can go 2 octaves higher. I think that goes out of range. But if you could go, yeah, so if this were an octave higher, it would have a little bit of a chance of joining in. But I mean, what do you even need the celesta in there for anyways, right? Like celesta is really like the icing on the cake, and this is more like Chateaubriand, right? So what do you need icing? You don't need that beautiful layer of, of like butter frosting on top of your, juicy steak, right? So I just feel it's a little bit out of place. It might be more audible if it were just simply playing, doubling this melody as high as it could possibly go, right? Now, like you could mark it up to forte, but the celesta's orchestral dynamic is mezzo piano, right? So that is like as loud as it can play, and to some extent, like how soft can it go? A little under piano, but not quite pianissimo, right? So there's a sort of a limited range of how much force will make any difference whatsoever in, like playing louder, playing softer. It doesn't really have that same degree, but I mean, you should continue to mark crescendos and different dynamic terms just for the case of context for the player, right? Okay, all right, so those are my thoughts on that. As far as like the orchestration of it, I love the idea of the bassoons and the flutes and so on, and the seconds and the firsts kind of doubling each other there. And then we've got this pizzicato double basses and the cellos here, and I think that all works pretty nicely. But like the thing is, the tuba, even at pianissimo, is going to make this very adding to which the timpani is going to really cut into the delicacy of your wind and string scoring right in here, of the melody, and you can hear that in the mock-up as well. Okay, so moving on into this, it gets more intense, more complex. We've got first oboe doubling first flute and so on, and just a thought here, and that is, what if this entire thing were actually scored on double reeds, right? Then I think that it would be a much clearer, warmer sound here. The way that it is right now, even with the first flute on that top is giving a little bit of color to the violins, but everything else around it is so highly spiced, right, that it kind of sort of robs that. And then the second flute is really contributing almost nothing to this because it's just way too soft in its first octave to engage, even though you've marked everything very, very soft here. There's just so much complexity going on, and and especially like with the bassoons right around that same area and so on. I just feel that it is wasted. It would be better to have two flutes on top and then just a single a single oboe on the or even the English horn, right, in order to play an octave in the winds. All right, so everything changes here. You're going to unison strings playing octaves with each other, and those are realized here with the piccolo on top. So be very careful. Like you've scored a high D here in the piccolo, right? So that is a note that ties in with your marking here, poco crescendo. But once again, like, what does that mean, right? So it is this D will have a great deal, possibly more power than you suspect, right? It's really going to ring out. And then as the music descends here, there will be a little bit of a loss of power on that high end. And yet you're going to a mezzo forte, right? So, do you really want the piccolo to go up to that high D? What if the piccolo just dropped down, right? And just let itself be like the kind of like a little bit of a resonance on top, right? Or what if you just didn't have piccolo, right? Until right around here. So that way, that beautiful unearthly shine would happen at the moment of greatest strength, right? So the roles, the role of the bassoon is kind of going into the clarinets. That's really cool. And the bassoons are kind of taking over some of the roles of the viola and clarinet and harp and so on and so forth. So here I feel, this is really well intentioned, but I feel that it's going to come off, more clumsily than you anticipate. I think that contrabassoon is perfectly fine. I think that of course, like a tuba players do not take this wrong. I don't mean that you play clumsily. It's just that the sense of added weight on such a, on this kind of gesture is going to, it's just going to, it's sort of like a tiptoeing elephant, right? So I think it's too much weight on something that needs to be more reserved, right? So I would really recommend cutting the tuba right in here, and then once again, here I'm telling you not to use tuba at all at this point, but maybe if you have to have timpani, bring it in here, right? Then I think that you just have much more lucid colors. All right, so bassoon and the doubling and the violas and the cellos right in that tenor register spot. I don't know if you really need this Divisi A3 right in here. I think that the problem here is the spreading of the string sound. It would almost be better if to focus on the harmony and the winds and have the strings play like a single note or maybe just thirds or whatever, just to, because their tone is going to get swallowed by everything else that's happening, the trumpets and the clarinets right in here and so on. So it's probably unnecessary to do this Divisi in 3, and this right in here as well. But I do like the way that you are problem solving right in here. I think that's very, very cool. You're really thinking about it a lot. And then once again, I just this low flute in here. You're really not going to the second flute is really not going to contribute anything to the tone weight until right around here, this D, and then going on, it's also kind of wasted a little bit, right? So there are alternative instruments that are doing very little or not enough or could be contributing and covering some of those notes and so on. So maybe this could be reordered in a certain way. And then horns coming in here at the see, so I don't know, the poco a poco crescendo thing, it's just is really such a blank slate, right? I think that it's obviously, with something that's sort of as stretched out as this, it's sort of awkward to put in one long hairpin, right? Sometimes it's cool when you have to end a poco crescendo with a further hairpin, just to really remind everybody, okay, now here we're going to the mezzo forte here, right? We just really are pushing into that. And if that is true, just kind of looking at the overall texture that you have building in here, would it be possible to start the horns, a bar or a bar and a half earlier, and playing a very soft harmonic roll in the back, and then push into this, so that when they arrive here, it's not so much of a sudden weight, sort of like dropping a sack of sand onto a canoe that is already loaded with supplies, is what it sort of feels like right there. Okay, this is really lovely right in here. Obviously, this is a suspended symbol, but you should still mark it, right? I'm just going to quickly jump back to the first page. Yeah, see, so you just mark it symbols, so not suspended symbols. So I would just say put that there. And then here, it's perfectly clear. Just, just helping the score reader and the copyist and everybody else out, the sight reader, the sight reading conductor out. All right, so aside from all of those little niggling kinds of, little possible details could be adjusted and fixed and so on, I think you've got a really strong approach here. And I'm just trying to figure out ways of making it even stronger, right? So those would be my recommendations. And, just one last thing, and that is that it's not really necessary to have A2 on everything. Do you know what I mean? Like on lines like this. It can sort of bring a thickness into it that is, you really don't need unless you are playing really loudly. This is really strange forte against everybody else's piano. Perhaps this was an accident. You hit the F key instead of the P key when you were the P key. That sounds weird. Okay, so yeah, so just think about possibly, just single voices, and then like you can divide certain things up between players, right? You could have the first play the first half, and the second player plays the second half, and that way they each have more time to breathe. Things like that. Yeah, and right in here, like I think that this is really a big ask. The oboist to slur down to the B and then back up, and then it's just, you know what I mean? It's like a really good oboe player would have no problem with that, but it's just a hassle, and it's harder to control. If you're having this played by a community or semi-pro orchestra, that conductors, the first thing the conductor is going to point at in the score, and I can tell you that is real because it actually happened to me, right? The conductor for one of my pieces, just desperately wanted. It's like, oh, can you show me your score? And I said, look, it's like, I'll show you my score. I have to warn you, this is just the first draft, and I'm going to go through and fix a lot of little things, out of range notes and blah blah blah. So I send it to him, and he sends me back a note saying, and he just got stuck on this one low B that I asked for. It was similar to this. It was like a B dipping down, and and it is something that I had not really gotten around to editing out or whatever, and he just got, so look. Just from experience, it's a playable note. A good player would not have a problem with this, but still it's just kind of uncomfortable and weird. So it's just better, considering how many other people are playing that B right in here. You do not have to have the oboist do it. All right. Okay, well, that is my brief take on your score, David. And wow, I wish I had time to really take this apart and have a big orchestration lesson with you. And that is really the same with everybody's score so far. I'm just so happy with the with the level of commitment and thought and just and ingenuity. And it always surprises me, and I shouldn't be surprised because this this is, I think, the 7th year that I've been doing this and doing the challenges in this way, and yet, it is always a pleasant, wonderful feeling. So, thank you, David, for your participation, and thanks for everybody out there watching this. And please leave David a helpful comment, some supportive feedback. It is really kind of the nature of this, and with only a few releases so far, I'm seeing that energy just. Somebody left a comment on Facebook, I think, that they had been watching everything and that they had spent 3 hours watching all the evaluations, and that is really awesome. That is a beautiful thing, and I want to thank everybody for that, really following these and for helping out on Patreon, those of you who are participating that way and subscribing to the website. It all helps, and I have some really great stuff planned for you all in the upcoming year for everybody to enjoy, whether they're participating or not, and some things that are going to be interrelated as well. And so just watch for all that stuff. But first, I need to get through these evaluations. So won't you join me in the next evaluation, which is also going to be looking at an awesome score. Thank you, David. Thanks, everybody. See you soon.